Ah yes, Wolfenstein, the true FPS. While Doom and Quake may have skyrocketed the FPS genre into popularity, Wolfenstein is where it all began. Wolfenstein may be much more simplistic and dated compared to the likes of Doom and Quake, but it is, however, still a great game in its own right. It's intense, fast-paced, and filled with hilarious attempts at German. But we're not here to talk about that game. We're here to talk about this game, which is also called Wolfenstein. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Console FPS, where I, a person who once thought it was socially acceptable to go out into public looking like this, review and do retrospectives on console ports and console-exclusive first-person shooters. Why, you may ask? Well, because I have nothing better to do with my life.
Wow, what a loser!
For this episode, we'll be taking a look at Wolfenstein for the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3. Now, this is an interesting title as it's the only Wolfenstein game to not be released for PC, making it a console-exclusive FPS and a perfect candidate for this series.
It's not a console exclusive.
Huh? It's not a console-exclusive?
No, it's released on PC too.
Well, shit for how hard it is to find on PC these days, it might as well be. You can't even get it on Steam or Good Old Games for crying out loud. Your only option for PC is to find a copy on eBay, and those go for much higher than the PS3 or 360 copy. And would it even run on a modern PC without a bunch of workarounds? PC Master Race my ass. But yeah, seriously, this is the one Wolfenstein game you can't get digitally for PC. And I honestly have no idea why. I've heard it's because Activision published it before Bethesda bought all of its IPs, but that doesn't quite make any sense as you can still get Return to Castle Wolfenstein, and that was also published by Activision. I've also heard a few people say it was the naming convention since it was just named Wolfenstein that Bethesda decided to remove it to avoid consumer confusion. Although that doesn't make a lot of sense to me either. I did some research on this, and by research I mean I spent 10 minutes on Google, and I didn't find anything concrete. But that's not what's important. What's important is I have a copy for the 360 and PS3, and I'm ready to get down to business. Now, unlike the last game I looked at, Doom 64, which I thought was merely overlooked, I found almost nothing but negative things about this game. And I want to see why. I'll admit this time I'm going in completely blind. I've played at least every other Wolfenstein game before except this one. Now, is it as bad as I've heard? Or is there something else at play here? Well, let's take a look. Before we get into the game proper, let's have a look at the box and manual here. The front cover is actually kind of cool. Sure, it's just a picture of a Nazi skeleton looking dude, but at least it's not just some generic guy holding a gun or something like that. It conveys its point well enough. They're gonna be Nazis, and they're not gonna be ordinary Nazis. The back of the box is a little more silly though. Let's take a look at some of these blurbs. Exploring this dark fantasy promises to be a gripping adventure. Well, we'll see about that. Unleash the Nazis' own dark powers against them as you battle unimaginable evil and unexpected foes. Experience movie-like intense action sequences. Oh boy, that's never a good sign when they use the word movie-like. Go into battle with a diverse collection of upgradable weapons. Team deathmatch and... okay, don't care. Now there's a picture of BJ firing a machine gun here. One thing bugs me about this. He's holding a Thompson submachine gun here. While this is a nice step up from previous Wolfenstein box arts, since he actually has a World War II period accurate weapon, you never actually get to use the Thompson submachine gun in this game. In fact, in all the cutscenes, BJ has a German MP40. Speaking of cutscenes, this game, like most, starts out with one. And I might add, it is a nicely rendered one, even for today's standard. It starts out with BJ sneaking around aboard a ship, but he quickly gets found out and has to take out a bunch of Nazis, Indiana Jones style. Though there end up being just too many for him to take on. All looks lost, but he's saved by this mysterious medallion and is able to escape the ship on a plane just as it blows up. Thrilling. Okay, I know this is supposed to be quote-unquote epic, but something about how it's directed or something just makes it come off as kinda silly. I can't tell if it was going for intentionally campy or if it's just a shitty cutscene. While this is the opening cutscene, the game is littered throughout with many more. Most during key plot points, but there are several that are just sprinkled in almost randomly, it seems. Some of these only last 2 to 3 seconds long. Not really a point against it or anything, it's just kinda stupid. Speaking of stupid, now is as good a time as any to make one observation I have. I have no other way of saying this, but BJ looks fucking stupid. I mean, just look at him. He has this ridiculous haircut and try-hard jacket. The devs tried way too hard to make him look cool. He looks like a Max Payne knockoff for crying out loud. I don't know, maybe I'm just spoiled by how macho and awesome he looks like in the newer games, but just look at the difference here. Hell, he even looked better in Wolfenstein 3D. But that's enough for visuals. Let's get moving on to more important things, like the plot. As you would expect from the plot of a Wolfenstein game, the Nazis are using super science and/or the occult to help them win the war, and it's BJ's job to stop them. This time you are sent to the German city of Eisenstadt, which the Germans are using as their base of operations. You are aided in your job by, interestingly enough, German civilians who are members of the resistance.
In Blaskowitz, I'm Visitor South Circle. Come with me. Your cover is already blown here.
I guess even the Germans are getting tired of the Nazi shit by now. On the way to meet up with the resistance, you are stopped by some Nazis, and during your fight, things start to get a little weird.
Get me down!
Oh, Nazis, what are you up to this time? They seem to be harnessing some new form of energy, and it seems that it has some relation to BJ's medallion. Perhaps someone in town will know if there's a connection. As for the people of Eisenstadt, there are several different groups who have various goals. You have the basic resistance members, occult enthusiasts, and the shady black market group. Okay, yeah, that's not very specific, but these guys are all incredibly forgettable, and I honestly couldn't care less. I guess John Carmack might have been right when he said video game plots aren't that important. Like I said, all these guys are completely forgettable. Except for this one Russian guy who's a part of the occult faction. He's absolutely adorable.
My name is Sergei Kovlov of the Golden Dawn. We are a group of scholars who study the occult.
Now say nuclear vessels.
It's here where I should note that everyone speaks English rather than German.
Get me down!
Nothing wrong with that in of itself, it just would have been cool to have them speaking German, like in the later games. I should also point out that the accents are pretty bad.
The black market brothers. They won't bite the hands that feeds them.
Then let's hope the Nazis don't start feeding them better.
But yeah, not a huge deal breaker. As for the city of Eisenstadt itself, it is where you will be spending a good majority of your time, as it acts as the game's hub. No, this game isn't quite on a level-by-level basis. It has more of a hub-based mission structure. Though most of the missions just involve you shooting Nazis and going to people who tell you to shoot more Nazis. The game tries to pretend there's more variety by calling them rescue missions, investigations, and even supposed stealth missions, but they all boil down to...
Another settlement has sent word that they need our help.
Also, the town repopulates with random Nazi encounters between missions.
The American is here!
This keeps things fresh. Well, at first. After a while, it still just got tedious. I often ended up avoiding these fights, if at all possible, just to get to the next mission, which would result in me fighting more Nazis. The fighting on the streets seems to have no real consequence as to what happens off the streets. You'll just run from a huge fight only to have the resistance members start telling you where you need to go next, while fighting is still going on outside. The biggest example of this was when there was this colossal battle outside of a hospital, with explosions everywhere and utter chaos. As soon as I got inside, a cutscene started, without anyone so much as mentioning the utter bedlam outside. This is very jarring, as it makes what is supposed to be a connected real world feel isolated and fake. Now, aside from the gameplay and story dissonance, the hub itself is mildly interesting, as it's not entirely linear. Entirely. There are a few ways to get from point A to point B, and you don't always have to head to the same spot each time. All over town you can find gold for weapons and intel for lore. Now, this is supposed to incentivize exploration, but honestly, fuck that. The market where you buy upgrades always seems to be just a little too far out of the way for my liking, and the intel is just boring fluff. Again, maybe I'm just being spoiled by the New Order's interesting world building, but that had all kinds of fascinating history and even cool things like original songs you could listen to. Here, just fluff. Now, the hub town may be slightly nonlinear, but the same cannot be said for the mission levels. In fact, they're painfully linear. The devs tried their best to disguise this fact with clutter and hectic fights, but it doesn't really work. Everything is just point A to point B. It has very few options and very few branching paths. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not one of those guys who wants everything to be a huge open sandbox, and I do in fact enjoy linear experiences. Hell, Half-Life is one of my favorite video game franchises of all time. But Half-Life was able to give you a seamless world filled with interesting puzzles and set pieces to break up the fights. Here, you just shoot Nazis. Okay, yeah, sure, this game also tries set pieces, but those are just as bland as the level design. You get on the back of a truck and shoot at mutants, take control of a super weapon or two, and that's really about it. There's very little sense of danger or excitement. Everything here just feels like a theme park ride. These set pieces honestly end up feeling more like interactive cutscenes. Say what you want about Half-Life 2's vehicle segments, but I would take those over any of these movie-like action sequences any day of the week. And speaking of Half-Life and set pieces, this game also has its fair share of more cinematic, for lack of a better word, set pieces, oddly reminiscent of Half-Life.
There's something in there. It's trying to kill us all.
For God's sake, open the silo door! They're coming for us! It's our only way out! Oh my God, we're doomed!
With Doom 3, Quake 4, and now this, it really does seem like id was heavily inspired by Valve's method of storytelling and world building, but just couldn't grasp the subtle nuances. And for all the effort they put into making these levels seem more interesting and less linear than they actually are, I still found myself occasionally getting lost or stuck because of all the clutter. I could complain about level design and crappy set pieces all day, but I got a lot more to talk about here. How much more of this video do I have to do here anyway? Oh, fuck me, that's a lot. This video is already over 10 minutes long and I still haven't even said half of what I wanted to? I guess Shakespeare might have been onto something when he said brevity was the soul of wit. Well, I never claimed to be witty. I'll see you guys in part 2.